Well, thank you very much for waiting. We know that it's a little warm out here, but it was much more warmer upstairs, where till we got off the elevator, where we got a very chilly reception from ICE and the director here. We were not allowed entry, and so we had to stand outside, bang on the door, and ultimately sit down in front of the door. Finally, a director came out and explained to us that she had been given direction not to allow anyone, member of the House or Senate or anyone else, into the facility. We began to ask her where she got her authority from, and her response was, "That's my directive." Now, we brought with us, and we'll read to you before we leave and certainly give to you, the public law that oversees this situation, a law that determines that members of the United States Congress, both the House and the Senate, have jurisdictional oversight over all ICE facilities, not whether they're a detention facility or something else, but over all facilities. I am a senior member of the Oversight Committee. I am the ranking member of the Committee on Government Operations, and I explained that to her, but she was not prepared to hear it or to deal with it. Each one of us will detail for the next few minutes what this was like, why it was such an insult, why it's such a stain on our democracy, and why, at the end of the day, we cannot allow it to continue. We had questions about medical care. We had questions about the number of detainees. We had questions about visits from lawyers and others, and all we got, quite frankly, was a very shrill and chilly response. This does not bode well here in Baltimore or anywhere if members of the United States Congress, who are duly authorized to come in and to inspect, visit, or walk through a federal facility, are not allowed in. So it's disheartening, and it's quite sad, to really tell the truth, that we're even having this press conference. But as you know, in city after city across this nation, this continues to be the Trump agenda. And that agenda is a selfish one. It is a spiteful one. So we don't know how many people are inside, except that we know, or we're told, that there are at least 20. We don't know who is ill or sick. We've been told that if that's the case, they will be taken out. And we don't know how long they're being held. So I'm just glad to be here with my colleagues. And I'd like to bring to the microphone the senior senator from the state of Maryland, who has led on this issue for a long time and is still leading, Senator Chris Van Hollen.
Thank you, Congressman Mfume, and to the members of the Maryland delegation who are here, and to all of you who are gathered here. We came here today to this ICE facility because it has become a hub of the inhumane Trump policies here in the state of Maryland. Donald Trump, President Trump, lied to the American people when he said that the Trump administration was simply going to focus on, quote, the worst of the worst. That they were going to focus on detaining and deporting people with histories of violence, people with criminal record, people who pose a threat to the public safety. That's a big lie. If you look at the Department of Homeland Security's own numbers, you will find that that is a big lie. Their own data shows that as of the end of June, nearly 72% of people being held in ICE detention had no criminal convictions. Their own data shows that as of late June, they classified 84% of their own detainees as having no threat level. There's no disagreement that when you have people breaking the law and committing violent crimes, that detention is appropriate and necessary. But that's not what the Trump administration is doing, and that's not what they're doing up in that ICE office. That's why they don't want the American public to know what's happening there. That's why they shut the door and locked us out. There's a sign on the door that says welcome. They didn't let members of Congress through that door, and the person who was in charge had no real answers to some of our pressing questions about the conditions right here. I'm not going to go through all those conditions. A number of complaints have been filed in courts around the country with respect to those conditions. We also have a long list of people who reside in Maryland who have no criminal histories, who have been detained here for a period of time far exceeding the 12-hour standard that it's supposed to be. In some cases, well over 60 days, which is way in excess of the standard for a, quote, holding facility. They are housing people here. That is what they are doing. And then they ship them off to other places around the country. And it's heartbreaking to see the names of some of these people. I think a lot of attention has been given recently to the pastor from the Eastern Shore. He was held here for over 60 hours before being shipped out. This holding cell has also become a place where the Trump administration's plan to violate people's constitutional right to due process has been front and center. This is the place where they held Kilmar Abrego Garcia before they shipped him down to CICOT, the notorious prison in El Salvador. This is where they denied him his due process rights. Then, of course, a 9-0 Supreme Court decision called out that illegality and said they had to facilitate his return. But this office, which we wanted to go see, has become a critical holding point for people who are being swept off the streets without due process and people who do not have any kind of violent history and pose no threat to public safety. But here they're treated inhumanely. We know that because we had a staff delegation visit back in March. Somehow between March and now, they've decided to not allow members of Congress to see what's going on in there. Even though, as Congressman Mfume says, the language of the law could not be more clear. And the person in charge upstairs really couldn't refute the plain language of the law that says members of Congress need to go in. So I will just end with this. You have to ask yourself why. Why? Why don't they want members of Congress to go in and see with their own eyes or talk to people who were detained there? Because they want to cover up what's going on in that place. They don't want the public to know how their taxpayers' dollars are being used. And that is obscene. I now want to turn it over to the other representative in our delegation from the Baltimore area, Johnny Yoshevsky.
Thank you, Senator, and good afternoon. I will add 2 observations. First of which is, before I came to Congress, my first job was as an American government teacher. And one of the many things I tried to teach my young people was about due process and the rule of law. And what we're seeing here across the country is the exact opposite of that. People here in Baltimore and across America are having their due process rights absolutely trampled on. And you have to ask yourself, if you're watching and if you're listening, what happens when it's me? When you are in a country, you are subject to that country's rules and regulations. Regulations that call for allowing members of Congress to visit detention facilities. Regulations that allow for immigration processes to proceed. You can have whatever opinions you want about what the law says. You don't have to like the individual in question. Because when it comes down to it, if it is you or your family, you want, and our Constitution demands, that you have those same due process rights. The second observation I would make is building on what Senator Van Hollen said. And that's, when you're a liar, you want to hide everything. When you lie, you want no one to see the truth. And so today, unfortunately, is one example in a long, terrible running list of lies from Donald Trump. He lied about January 6th, said it was peaceful, and wanted you to forget about those pardons of people who assaulted police officers. He and extreme Republicans in Congress lied about health care. No one's going to lose their health care. Meanwhile, 10 million Americans by the nonpartisan CBO are going to be kicked off of health care. They lied about that. They lied about food supports. They're lying about what's happening in facilities just like this. They're lying about the Epstein files. Take your pick. We have a president who can't handle the truth. Because once the public finds out that truth, there will be a reckoning. And so I want to thank and applaud my colleagues here in Team Maryland for standing together for the truth. And with that, I'll turn it over to one of those colleagues, the other U.S. Senator from Maryland, Angela Alsop-Brooks.
Well, you know, this has been a difficult morning already. And I want to just first level set about why we're here. We are here because we have not only a responsibility but a right to be here, and that right was given to us by the people. All of the people standing here are elected by the people. We were sent here to do this work, and so we represent them, their voices, their values, their desires. And it occurs to me, even as I walked into this dark, shameful, awful building, that this building belongs to the people. This is a federal building. It's owned by us. This is not Donald Trump's building. This building belongs to Marylanders, and it belongs to Americans. And, you know, my observation in coming here today is that this administration is really ruling by fear, and there's so much shame. So this building is full of people who feel ashamed of the work that they are doing. And why do you know they're ashamed? Because we saw some up in the hallway, they have their faces covered, the people who have blanketed not just Maryland to carry out this evil, but the ones who across the country have to cover their faces to go to work each day. Ask yourself if you're doing the right thing. If you have to cover your face, you can't even let people see you. But there's an attempt to make people feel fearful, but there's also a shame. And what I'm going to tell you this, the fear will pass, the shame that our country will carry as a result of this conduct and so many other things will last for generations. The shame of it all. And also be clear, there are people who have been detained. These are humans. And by the way, we represent every single living person in the state of Maryland. Whether they got here 3 days ago or 30 years ago, or have lived their whole lives here, we represent every living person who lives in the state. And this is the most inhumane thing we have seen. They lock the doors because, again, they're ashamed. They can't even come out of their offices. They're ashamed to face any of us. But I tell you again, we're going to reap this. We're going to reap what we have done here. And this president doesn't give a rat's ass about any of us. Some of the people who have been detained in this building have relatives who probably voted for him. And he doesn't care about them either. And it is just a long line of people. What the American people need to see is this man doesn't care about any of us. Any of us. You know, we recently had the flood, the awful flood in the western part of the state. People's lives and livelihood taken away from them. And what is the response of this administration is to deny us disaster relief again. And those are people, many of them, who voted for him. And you know why? Again, because he could care less really about any of us. And so we're going to continue to do this work to make sure we're shining a light. We're not only demanding that the rights of the people who are here be respected, that we be allowed to carry out the work that we were sent to do, but we are also here to shine a light on the evil, the sheer evil that is happening in our country. You know, evil persists in darkness, and you can look at this ugly, this is a dark, ugly situation that is happening here. And the person who was sent to us to give us, she couldn't give us any information. She's supposed to be the acting director. She doesn't know how many people are here. She couldn't give you anything. And again, because all of these people are fearful and ashamed. And it's a terrible thing. So I'm going to hand over now to my colleague, Congressman Glenn Ivey, for his comments.
Thank you to my colleagues. Thanks for all of you coming out today. I went to El Salvador about 6 weeks ago, and I wasn't shocked that I was turned away at the door when I went to visit a prison there, because they don't have the longest history of democracy there, and arguably they don't have it right now. But this is unbelievable that they would turn us away from this building here in the United States, members of Congress with a right to go see our constituents. And not only that, the power of the purse under the Constitution gives us the authority and the obligation to conduct oversight hearings, to make sure the money's being spent wisely. They wouldn't even let us get in to do that. Now, what was odd was when we talked to the director, the mouthpiece they sent out, I asked her, are attorneys allowed to go back in there? And she said yes. With staff, as you heard a moment ago, was allowed to go in there a few months ago. But it's incredible that they can go in, but we can't. We control the power of the purse. We're not allowed to go in and see what's going on. They don't want us to go in. They're scared of what we'll see. But at the end of the day, sunlight is the best disinfectant, and there will be sunlight on this. There will be accountability. There will be oversight. It's going to happen, and we're going to keep working until we get that. And now I'll turn it over to my colleague, Sarah Elfreth from...
Thank you, Congressman Ivey. Folks, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, and our constituents are being housed and detained upstairs, this is a detention facility, and the law is clear that Congress has the right and responsibility to conduct oversight. And I would hope that every American, Democrat, Republican, unaffiliated, sitting at home watching this would agree and want their Congress, their elected representatives, to conduct thorough oversight. I would hope they would agree with the fundamental constitutional right of due process and the rule of law. Just another observation to add on to my colleagues' eloquent observations. Being new to Congress, I turned to Senator Van Hollen and said, pre-Trump administration, how many locked doors of a federal office have you encountered? And he said none. And yet this is the second time. First was USAID. We visited Social Security. We're visiting this. The amount of locked doors your members of Congress are experiencing while conducting, again, their legal right to exercise oversight should astonish every single American, regardless of your party affiliation. But just because we had a locked door in front of us, and just because the director provided absolutely no assurances to us that our constituents are being treated humanely. And I've had a number of constituents pass through these doors, some who have not had access to their medications, some who had their license and credit cards taken away and still not returned to this day, despite them being released by ICE. We have a right and responsibility to advocate for our constituents. That's what we did today, and it's what we'll continue to do every single day from here on out. Thank you.
We're going to obviously take a few questions from those of you in the press. If you could just identify yourself before your question, that would help all of us.
Hi, Jeff Barker with the Baltimore Sun. So I know you wanted to generally tour the facility, but were there specific things you were looking for, health and safety conditions, etc.?
Well, those were among the things. We don't know what to look for if we can't get in, but we were very much concerned about the health of individuals. And as the senator said, these are not people necessarily who've been convicted of crimes. These are people who just got snatched, coming out of church, coming out of the Walmart. 80% of them have no criminal record. And so their health and their safety is important because many of them have children who they can't even contact. So it, again, is disheartening that the acting director, who, by the way, said she's been on the job for 3 months, comes in and changes what was the previous policy 4 months ago. And so we're unable, Jeff, to see anything at all as a result of that. As I said in my opening remarks, we banged on the door and then had to ultimately do a sit-in in front of the door. And we all sat there until she came out from another entrance. But it's pathetic that nobody can tell you what's going on in there except the people who work there. And as Senator also Brooks said, many of them are ashamed.
Can I answer one other part of that? Jeff, one other thing that was already mentioned, I just want to reiterate. Our teams have been to this facility. They came in March, and they reported then that there were some concerns. And when you're saying, what are we looking for? We've heard from the families of many who have been detained here about the horrible conditions, about the lack of access to medical care when necessary, medications, lack of access to medications they've needed, and other really inhumane conditions. And so we're also here following up not because we're hearing specifically from family members about the inhumane conditions in this facility, and it is also supported by what our teams have been here to visit as well, our staffs, and so that's the other reason we are now returning after a March visit that we're back.
Yeah, I would encourage everybody just to look at some of the lawsuits that have been filed by people who have been held here, and we have copies, if you're interested, of a lawsuit that was filed by 2 women who were detained here. I'll just read the summary of their complaint. They complain about overcrowding, cold temperatures, inadequate access to food, to water, to medicine. One of them was a diabetic, and they didn't immediately provide the medication, sleep, hygiene, and in their case, delayed connection with any kind of legal counsel. Those are just 2 of the stories that we have a lot of questions about, because scores of people have been through this center. And when our staff came here representing us back in March, we had more questions than answers. We came back today to get more answers. They obviously don't want to provide answers.
Other than this law, I'm Brenda Winter with the Baltimore Banner. I'm wondering, other than this law that you shared, what other congressional tools in the toolbox do you have to exercise your authority, and if so, what are they and what's next? To hold the people in this building accountable.
Well, I'll let my colleagues respond, but as a senior member of the Oversight Committee, this is top of the agenda for me. Unfortunately, the Speaker of the House, not wanting to talk about the Jeffrey Epstein matter, sent everybody home for an early recess. But the day we return, I will raise this with Chairman Comer and other members of the committee. I'm going to seek as best I can to get some sort of bipartisan consensus that the committee finds a way to prevent this sort of thing from happening anywhere around the country. Short of that, I'm going to reach out to the Maryland Attorney General here, Anthony Brown, just to get his thinking on some of this. As you know, he's been very active in his challenges against this administration. But as a member of the committee, I think it's very important that the committee go on record.
With CBS News, how many people who are being held in this detention center have been identified? That's a great question.
Yeah, to my knowledge, we've not gotten a full list. We have a partial list of people. Right. Well, we don't. They wouldn't tell us how many people are there now. So this is the director of this office, acting director, who could not tell us how many people they were detaining today or how long that they've been detained. We do know of some of the folks who've been through here. I mentioned the pastor, but there have been others. Abrego Garcia was taken here. So we're not letting go of this. There's also an appropriations process in the House and the Senate where we can try to use the tools of the appropriations law. That is the tool we used actually to require that that members of Congress be allowed in, which they are ignoring. But you know, we will work with Republicans. The problem is, as was just mentioned, Republicans are just not willing to stand up to Donald Trump in support of due process and the Constitution.
So ICE isn't volunteering any kind of information. We hear about these arrests from our constituents. We are tagged on social media, and then our teams go to work reaching out to the families, reaching out to the attorneys, connecting them with resources, and then contacting ICE. Sometimes we get a response, oftentimes we don't. And that should also be alarming to the American people, that this administration is not responding. If this is how they're treating their elected officials, their members of Congress, how are they treating everyday Americans? So I would encourage folks to reach out to our offices if we can be of assistance, and again, we will fight every single day to make sure we're representing our constituents.
She said that you should contact her office. Are you planning to come back? Follow that process that she gave us to come back?
Well, it's a consensus that the group hasn't gotten to because we expected to be inside, quite frankly, at this time. But we will meet and gather shortly thereafter. Now, I know somebody is thinking, well, why not just reach out to the Justice Department so that they can get involved? Let me just say for the record, this Justice Department under Donald Trump is the just ICE department. That's all we get from them. And so looking for some sort of relief there is not necessarily possible, I think. But we're going to get together and figure out next steps. I know what I'm going to be doing, and Chris raised a good point about appropriations. There are two still left.
Just to clarify there, they've been moving the goalposts here, right? So there was a period within even the last week, I think, where they said, well, you just have to give 7 days notice. The statute doesn't require notice, but their position as of right now should be very clear. They're not letting anybody in here, regardless of notice or how long the notice is. This is a lawless administration. Remember, this Trump administration actually filed a lawsuit against every Maryland federal district court judge because they were defending